Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Devin Crosby of Lynn University. Leadership is a dynamic occupation that requires vision, excellence, but most importantly, the humility to serve your people on a daily basis. As you lead, make sure to become grounded in something greater than yourself. This will shape your decisions, provide clarity to your team, and cultivate trust. And trust is the foundation of success. Enjoy the podcast.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Colleen Sorem. Colleen is the Deputy Athletics Director at University of Maryland. Greetings, Colleen. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ty. Appreciate it.
I am excited to have you. Now, you've been at Maryland since 2014, served in a couple different roles. But 2 of those years, you were the interim deputy athletics director. And of course, now you are the deputy athletic director, which is interesting. And I want to ask you a couple questions about that when we get to it. But your experience has been in internal and business operations. You spent time at Towson, at Florida Gulf Coast, and UMass Lowell. And you've managed there at Maryland a $100 million budget. For the most part, I guess the pandemic kind of had some effects on that, like it did for everybody in basically a whole country. You also oversee football, women's basketball, and women's lacrosse, and you are involved in some strategic planning and been in the industry for roughly 20 years. So you have a wealth of experience. So I'm really glad to have you on.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about being the CFO. But before I do that, I want to talk about that transition in 2016, where you were interim for 2 years, and then you became that permanent position. Talk to me about the role when you were interim as opposed to the role when you were named permanent. Like, what was the transition? What were were there differences in responsibilities? Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think anytime you're an interim, I think it depends on the situation and, who is the leader above you and what essentially has been told to you. And so I think in my position with interim at the time, we were in a transition phase, but we were kind of in a pause. We weren't sure what the next steps were going to be. So really, I was allowed to be the role of the interim deputy AD and really make the decisions that we could make on a day-to-day basis. I would say where it became a little bit challenging was maybe looking at future and planning and long-term planning. That's where it became, I think, a little bit more challenging as far as responsibilities and oversight. As long as that leader above you gives you that, respect, and the staff knows that, you are treated the same way as, somebody in that role would be, I think that it makes it a little bit easier. At the time, Damon, who was the current AD, he was the interim AD also at the time. And so he, made it clear, although these are interim roles, she has the same title and the same level of respect as if she was an interim. So I think it's walking a fine line. You have to make sure that you're still doing your job. And really at that time, I was doing 2 jobs. I was the senior associate AD for internal operations. So I was managing all of those duties, which was, I think, business, HR, facilities, and IT at the time. And then I stepped into the deputy role. So it was really kind of doing 2 jobs. And that was probably the most challenging part of it, I would say, is trying to find my feet with that. But really, I'm lucky I have incredible staff around me that made that transition a lot easier.
Yeah, it's interesting. 2 years as interim. Initially you come in and like you mentioned, Damon had to make sure you had the influence you needed to be effective in the role. And you trained through your career to be in a leadership role such as that one. And now you are executing decisions with the leadership mentality in mind, right? Which you have probably developed a habit to do up to that point, but now you're actually doing that. I wonder about the habits you developed while you were in the interim role that you are using now that you may not have had those type of leadership decision-making habits before being in the interim deputy athletics director role.
It's funny you bring that up. I'm definitely a person, I would say, as everybody would say, as you grow in your career, you learn things about yourself. Some of it is things you don't want to learn, and some of it's, ways you want to be better, and some of it's ways you want to change. And I think probably the years leading up to that influenced me the most, and the leaders around me. And so what I saw in front of me was some things that I wanted to do differently. with myself. And I would say one of those things is, I think when you get put in that deputy role, at that time, what you have done before matters. You need the respect of your colleagues. You need to have good relationships with your colleagues. So everywhere I've been, I really focused on relationships. And that to me is the beginning of anything. That respect gets earned. You don't just walk in just because they give you an interim deputy title doesn't mean that people are going to respect you. So I think having those relationships helped me. And then really taking action, not being passive. I think that it was in that role that I needed to really step up and step into something.
Yeah, they help. The CFO position is what I wanted to ask you about. And the next question I ask you, I actually want you to take two different pairs of glasses, right? I want you to answer the question with one perspective of without the pandemic, right? And then I want you to answer the question with the perspective of the pandemic. But I want to know what some of the challenges are, when you're creating a budget we mentioned that your budget in good times, right, is $100 million budget. And this is the NCAA Division I FBS Power 5 athletics department. You guys moved to the Big Ten, which I know helped financially significantly. Talk about the challenges of creating that budget and I guess answer it in two different ways, two different perspectives, with the pandemic, without the pandemic.
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard for us to think about without the pandemic right now,
exactly,
but
yeah.
I'm going to put those glasses on first time.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say, without the pandemic, the move to the Big Ten was great for us financially and really, super excited to be in the conference. But it came with a whole nother set of challenges. Is sometimes we'll say, we moved to a really expensive neighborhood, and there are people that have quite a large budget, double the budget that we do. So comparison is the thief of everything, I feel like, sometimes in our industry. And so I think building those relationships and getting our coaches to trust in the process and trust in what we're building here is really important. We talk about fiscal responsibility a lot. We talk about balancing wants versus needs. We are not at an institution where everybody can have exactly what they want. What our goal is to get everybody exactly what they need. What do you need to operate? What do you need to operate this program at a high level and be competitive in that level? And then within that, you have to focus on your priorities of your department, the priorities of your department, the priorities of each team. And so what I will do is I challenge our coaches, a lot. Okay, you've just given me a list of 12 things. Tell me your top 3, because you can't have all 12 of these. So I think being able to have tough conversations is really important. And then in all of that, you also need to focus on equity. You need to make sure that you're doing things in an equitable manner. You're looking at things from a different lens. I think the biggest challenge, probably pre-pandemic and really post-pandemic, is going to be managing the changing environment of collegiate athletics right now. It is a freight train that's coming at us, and I don't think anyone knows exactly how it's going to change. So what I've tried to do here is think differently, think creatively, how can we create revenue that's new? What is something that nobody else has thought of? So many times in this industry, we do the same things, and there's a reason why we do them. They work. But I think where we're going and the challenges that we're coming up right now are we need more revenue for that. And so what are we going to do? And then on the flip side, what is something that we could potentially cost? What are cost savings that we can do that won't hurt teams, that won't hurt our staff, that maybe we've done that, but maybe that's not efficient. Why did we do that before? If you want to talk about the pandemic and what the pandemic has done, I think the pandemic has made us take a step back and make the industry take a step back and look at, are we doing things in the best fiscally responsible way possible? So we've had to be a little bit more creative. Post-pandemic, the emphasis is going to be on how can you drive more revenue in a different way besides tickets and fundraising? What else is there that you can drive revenue in? And then how can you manage expenses? What are those things that you can be smart about, cut back on, and do differently that won't affect our student athletes, from a health and safety and well-being side of view?
Yeah, those are interesting questions. And I think the creativity, right? A lot of people talk about creativity, but this is really, really where it's going to impact the survival of a lot of people in terms of athletics and really just business in general, right? How can you be creative in bringing money in and be creative in managing our expenses? That's an excellent answer there. One thing I want to touch on, I worked with football coaches for almost 15 years at the American Football Coaches Association. And you mentioned they give you a list of 12 things. And every coach believes that those 12 things are absolutely necessary for me to be successful as a football coach, right? You guys brought
Yes.
me here. You
Yep.
can't expect me to do all of the job with half of the resources. How can I do it without all these 12 things? I wonder about some of those conversations, that you've had with coaches, but then also the people who are in the sports administration role, right? Who are administering other sports, and they have to come to you about what their coach is asking for. Talk to me a little about those types of conversations.
Sometimes those aren't fun conversations, Ty. Let me
Right.
let me
Yeah.
tell you. But I think it's really why you're going to hear me say it over and over. It's really why I focus on the relationship piece. If the coach has a belief and a trust in you, that you are doing everything you can for that program, that means you need to be honest. That means you need to be straightforward. That means you need to tell them the good and the bad. And to me, that's how you have these typical conversations. I've lucked out. I've worked with some really great coaches, and obviously Coach Loxley, was a part of hiring Coach Loxley. Super excited to have him here. He bleeds Maryland through and through, and the best part about Coach Loxley is he wants to be so successful at Maryland with our football program, but he understands that our department needs to be successful too, and he's a part of that piece. I think some of that is expectation setting when you hire somebody, and when you're bringing somebody in. I think you really need to be upfront and have those conversations. I think, if you're telling somebody they're going to be at the top of everything, and this is what they're going to have, and then you walk in and you're pulling the wool over their eyes, then I think that you're going to have more difficulties. So I think the key, like I said, is communication, like honesty and straightforwardness, and then really, not being afraid to have the tough conversations. I actually just walked into his office earlier today. Someone on his staff, we were talking about something that they wanted to do, and I said, I'm going to ask you for your priority list again. Because that may change from year to year, but what is that? Is it nutrition? Is it recruiting? Is it equipment? Is it, what are those things? And then when you want to talk to me maybe about travel or buses or planes or things like that, okay, well, then that's seventh on your list. This is first on your list, so I'm going to tell you. So I think it's really kind of explaining to them, talking them through it. And I believe that coaches that understand it will accept it. If it's explained to them, they have two choices. Okay, they can get on the bus or not. And I think if you get on the bus and you work together, I want all of our teams to be successful. I think that's one of the hardest things about being the CFO is sometimes you feel like you personally are the reason that, oh man, I can't give them that. They're going to be so upset. And so I think, again, I think it's really setting those priorities and then holding the coaches accountable for that too. Okay, well, you told me this was your top priority, but now you're asking for these three other things. So which one is it? Because sometimes the reason why we are wasteful is because we just change whenever we change. And when you don't have as much money, you can't do that. So I think, holding coaches accountable for what they say, and then them holding me accountable for what I say is fair. So for me, it's about communication. It's about over communicating. We have had coaches meetings monthly, and Damon and I, and in those monthly meetings, we talk about the budget in every single meeting. We let them know where we are. We let them know if it's good or bad. We let them know if things are going to be changing, so that they're not surprised when we're having some of these conversations. And I think that's probably why the conversations might be a little bit easier. I mean, they're not great, but they might be a little bit easier.
Yeah. I imagine other people on staff who are sport admins probably do and have taken cues from you in how to handle those type of discussions with the coaches, whether it's budgets or whatever resource, whatever someone needs.
Yeah, I think it's important to, one of the things I've stressed as I moved into this role, being the deputy and the CFO, is that they shouldn't only be hearing from me. One, it's hard sometimes because you don't want to be the only one that's kind of giving everybody bad news. So some of that is, I'm happy to have that conversation with them the first time. And then the second time or the third time, it might me say, no, I want you to have this conversation with them. You know what? You talk to them about their priorities, and you can bring that back with me. So I do think, I'm never going to throw any staff out there alone, but I do think that you want them to experience that because you want them to be able to handle that. So I definitely think that I think that it's helpful for them that It just happens to be that the deputy is the CFO, so I can talk to them a little bit more about that. But I think that it has helped. On the flip side, sometimes it gives people a crutch, where it's, oh, okay, well, Colleen, you'll just have this conversation. No. Let's make sure we're both having this
Yeah,
conversation.
right. Which is probably a benefit to them in their careers that
Yeah.
you nudge them back like, no. This is one you can have. Go talk to the coach. Tell them what
Yep,
you want to tell
yep,
them.
yep. And
Make
we
sure
have,
it works.
and again, we have great staff who is willing to do that. And is, what I love about our staff is that they want to learn, they want to get better. And if they have questions, they're going to ask. I think that anytime with all of us, not being afraid to ask a question, wanting to get better in everything that you do is what just makes better employees.
Right. Yeah. So looking at the responsibilities you have on your website, obviously CFO is a huge responsibility, but you're also this deputy athletics director role, right? So there's a wide variety of things and people that you are responsible for, and processes and those types of things. I wonder how you give each area of your role the attention necessary for it to be successful, right? When you're talking about managing a sport, it's a lot more than just the bottom line, right? Let's make sure we get the resources right. There's probably a whole lot more to that. And you mentioned people and relationships. So talk to us a little bit about balancing your responsibilities.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most challenging things in any role. But, I do think, in this role, it is really challenging. And I think that it's really, really important, the people who you have around you. I think you have to trust your staff. You have to trust who you work with. And because you have to be able to delegate and empower people. I'll say it again, when you have a staff that that you don't have to worry about, that they're making the right decisions, it helps you be able to focus on other things. I'm kind of big picture day-to-day operations of the department, where people are funneling up information to me. But a lot of times, hopefully it's just informing. Many times it is, okay, well, we need a decision to be made. But what makes me be able to do my job a little bit better is when people feel empowered and people feel that they can make their own decisions. Obviously, there are certain things that rise to every level. You need to make sure that the deputy AD and the athletic director are okay with things. So I think there's a difference between asking for permission and I'm giving you a heads up. And I think that your staff has to feel that. I think communication is essential. I probably get, I don't know, a million emails a day, but what I have figured out is I've figured out how to manage up to my boss. And I've asked, I've talked about this with the folks that I supervise, is my best way of communication is text message. So if you send me an email and I haven't responded within a day, I need you to text me and say, hey, I need you to look at that email, or text me and say, so I think letting them know, whether it's a strength or a weakness, you want to call it, or whether my communication style is a little bit different. Sometimes the reason that is I'm in meetings all day long. And so I'm checking my emails at 7:00 at night or 8:00 at night. So what I want the staff to know is that I am available to them. And what I hope that they all know is, you know what? Hey, she might not get your email right now, but if I text her, she's going to respond within 5 minutes if it's an emergency, and she's going to be there and she'll read my email. At some point that day, she's going to get to your email. So I do think that everybody deserves your time, and it's really hard to give your time to everybody. So I think it's coming up with, those priorities at the time. During football season, I talked to Coach Loxley a whole lot more than I talked to him in the spring. In the spring, we have check-ins weekly, but I don't need to talk to him every day, like in the fall, where maybe I'm talking to him a lot more. So it's priorities in the department, it's priorities at the time of year. And then I really think that the biggest thing is making sure that you have that open communication with your staff, because there are times where I may not be managing it well, and having that where someone can say, what, hey, Colleen, I really need you to focus on this, or hey, this needs to be a priority. I think I've got really great staff where if I'm going to miss, someone's going to help me. I think having a good team around you is, hey, don't forget about this. We need to make sure that we focus on this too. So I will say that it takes a village. Sometimes I think we talk about titles, but I don't think any of this happens without all the people around you.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. There's something you said that I really want to hone in on. I think it's excellent. Sometimes in leadership, you have to learn how the leader wants to be communicated to, right? But what's great about what you said is you tell everybody, look, this is how you can reach me, right? If I don't respond to you, this is how you can reach me. And I think that is an asset in an organization, so people aren't trying to figure out, how do I get her to focus on what I need here? So I think that is definitely an asset. I'll ask you one more question here, and then we'll wrap. The nuances of leading people and understanding organizational processes, setting and accomplishing goals, all those skills that some of us may learn in the class, some of us may have learned in athletics, but most of us learn through our experiences. I wonder the aspects of organizational leadership, right? I think by the nature of this conversation, your comfort zone is finances, right? Understanding the budget and that type of thing. But Maryland has had its ups and downs, just like a number of other institutions. When we get in a rut, we tend to lean on what we are comfortable doing. And I wonder, is that just numbers for you, or if things are going, if there are some challenges and you got to make tough decisions, does it always come back to numbers, or are there other areas of organizational leadership, organizational responsibility that you lean on when things get tough?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Being in this role and for the past 2 to 4 years, what has helped me is, although the numbers are my background, you don't survive in this position if that's the only thing that you focus on. And I think that focusing on increasing your revenue, looking at things creatively, I'm a big picture vision person. And what I've struggled with as a numbers person, what is the hardest thing is sometimes when somebody has a great idea, my first reaction in the past used to be, how much is it going to cost us?
Oh, yeah. I've
And
dealt
so
with that
as a
before.
CFO, that's a hard thing to change. In the deputy role, that's something that I've had to change. Why don't you bring me your idea and how much it costs? And then, what I found is there was a point where people didn't want to bring ideas up because we don't have the money for it. We don't have the money for it. And so when I became the deputy and Damon became the AD, the first thing that he wanted to do was super smart. And we came up with, he said, you know what? We don't have a lot of money, $300,000, $400,000. Let's come up with a bunch of projects, small projects that people have been wanting to do so that they can see that there's hope, that there is, going to be progress that is made. And so we did some things, and they made a big splash and a big difference, not only for our staff, but even for, a lot of it, some of it was branding and some things around campus that, campus even noticed some of these things. And so I think a lot of it is modeling. You need to be a role model for other staff, but, I've also learned a ton from my leader too. Numbers is what got me here probably. And I think it's helped me guide my career because it lets you be involved in everything. But I would say, I believe the reason why I am successful in this job probably is the relationship management and the communications style that I have with our staff. I think that people feel that I am approachable and can chat about things, but I'm going to challenge them too. So I think that you kind of have to, you want to motivate folks and you want them to have pride in your institution. And then you need to figure out how to manage right now. That's probably the biggest challenge, in this pandemic is while you are severely financially challenged, we have jobs to do. We all have jobs to do still. And so needing to make sure that it isn't doom and gloom and that they see something bigger and that we're still going to be able to accomplish great things at Maryland because I think we are and we will continue to do that, but not always just focusing on the budget. I think is really important in that too.
Yeah, that's a interesting habit to break, right? Which I think will help you in the role you're in and possibly any role you serve in the future. Colleen, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Ty. I appreciate it.
That was Colleen Sorem. She is the Deputy Athletics Director at University of Maryland. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.